At 11:42 a.m., while the demo screens still glowed blue against the glass walls, the COO erased her from the product with a smile sharp enough to cut steel. Nobody noticed when she slid a slim folder across the legal table, until the investor call ended in silence and $22 million vanished from the room like oxygen before a fire alarm. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt espresso and overheated projectors, the kind of scent that clung to startups trying too hard to look unstoppable. Rain threaded down the windows in silver lines, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of steel and cold light. On the giant screen, the company logo rotated slowly above the words Next Gen Adaptive Intelligence Platform, dramatic enough to make investors feel history was about to happen. Maya stood near the back wall with her laptop half closed against her chest. Not beside the executives, not near the product lead, certainly nowhere close to the COO. Just close enough to hear everything. Latency dropped another 18% overnight, the COO announced smoothly, pacing near the display like a late-night talk show host rehearsing applause cues. Our engineering leadership pulled off something extraordinary. Engineering leadership? The phrase drifted across the room and landed like dust on Maya's shoulders. 3 nights earlier, she had fallen asleep face down on her keyboard after rewriting the synchronization layer that everyone else claimed was impossible to stabilize before launch. Her apartment still smelled like instant ramen and soldered plastic from the emergency hardware tests. Yet here, under the polished lights and designer furniture, her contribution had become invisible before the applause even started. A junior analyst leaned toward another and whispered, "I heard the architecture came from the COO himself." Maya looked down at her coffee. Cold already. That hurt more than she expected. The demo began. Screens shifted. Metrics climbed. Investors nodded with carefully controlled excitement, pretending not to look impressed while mentally calculating acquisition scenarios. Somewhere behind Maya, someone tapped rapidly on Slack notifications. Somewhere farther away, thunder rolled across the city like a warning too distant to matter yet. Then came 11:42. The COO smiled at the room, one hand casually in his pocket. "Before we finalize release attribution," he said lightly, "we've streamlined the engineering credits for external presentation, simpler branding, cleaner messaging." Maya's pulse slowed instead of quickened. That was always how it happened before something terrible. He turned toward her briefly, not enough for others to notice, just enough. "Your name won't be on the release?" The sentence arrived softly, almost friendly, like someone politely informing a passenger the ship had already left. For one suspended second, the room stayed alive around her, the hum of climate control, keyboard clicks, distant traffic below 30 floors of glass, but it all sounded underwater. Maya felt every sleepless hour compress into something sharp beneath her ribs. Nobody spoke, because nobody understood. The COO continued immediately, voice smooth as polished stone. "The company owns all collaborative output, of course. We move as one unit here." A few executives nodded automatically. One investor frowned. Tiny reaction, easy to miss. But Maya saw it. And so did legal counsel sitting near the far edge of the table. Interesting. The COO resumed the presentation without a crack in his rhythm. Charts rose, forecasts expanded, revenue projections glowed emerald green across the wall screens. Yet beneath the performance, Maya noticed tiny fractures spreading through the atmosphere like hairline cracks in glass. The product lead avoided eye contact. The CTO stared too long at his tablet. And legal counsel quietly stopped taking notes. Maya lowered herself into a chair near the corner, movements calm enough to seem detached. Inside, however, memory after memory flashed like sparks under high voltage. The ignored emails, the missing acknowledgments, the accidental omission from sprint summaries, the time her repository access had briefly vanished right before executive review. At first, she thought it was ordinary corporate chaos, then politics, then insecurity. Now she finally understood. This had been preparation. The realization should have made her angry. Instead, it made her strangely clear. Outside, the storm thickened, turning the windows dark despite the early hour. Reflections swallowed the room. Executives now looked like floating silhouettes trapped inside their own presentation deck. Maya opened her laptop. No dramatic gestures, no confrontation, no trembling outrage, just silence and the soft mechanical rhythm of keys. A notification blinked in the corner of her screen. Deployment audit complete. Another followed immediately after. Signed commits verified. Her fingers paused. The irony almost made her laugh. Weeks ago, after a disastrous infrastructure incident, compliance had required every senior engineer to cryptographically sign commits for security traceability. Most people complained. A few ignored it. Maya had followed protocol perfectly because, unlike executives, engineers survived by assuming systems would someday need proof. Now proof sat quietly inside her machine, like a loaded lighthouse waiting for fog. At the front of the room, applause broke out after the final performance metrics appeared. The COO accepted congratulations with practiced humility. "We're ready to scale aggressively," he said. Another investor asked, "And the core optimization layer? Fully proprietary?" "Entirely internal," the COO replied without hesitation. Maya looked up slowly. There it was, not the insult. The lie? A strange stillness settled over her. Anger cooled into precision, thin and dangerous as ice forming across black water. She remembered her father once teaching her chess at a kitchen table scarred with coffee stains. "Never rush after the first attack," he used to say. "People expose themselves when they think the board already belongs to them." Across the room, legal counsel finally met her eyes. Only for a second, but long enough. Maya closed the laptop halfway and stood. Nobody stopped her because nobody imagined she mattered enough to stop. She crossed the room quietly while another executive discussed rollout timelines. The carpet muted her footsteps. The investors barely noticed her movement. One assistant carried in fresh espresso shots on a silver tray, adding another layer of caffeine and tension into the overheated air. When Maya reached legal counsel, she placed a thin folder beside his tablet. No speech, no accusation, just documents. On top sat printed repository history timestamps. Below them, authentication records, and beneath those, the Git log with verified signed commits tied directly to her credentials. Counsel's expression did not change, but his hand stopped moving. That tiny pause felt louder than thunder. Maya returned to her desk outside the conference room before anyone realized she had left. The open office stretched around her in rows of glowing monitors and exhausted ambition. Half-empty energy drinks crowded desks like monuments to burnout. Someone nearby argued softly about Kubernetes scaling. Another engineer slept in a chair with noise-canceling headphones still on. Normal startup life. Except the air now carried something else, the faint metallic scent before catastrophe. Her Slack exploded minutes later. Did legal ask for deployment logs? Why is compliance requesting repo history? Who triggered audit review? Maya muted notifications. Then she opened a terminal window and stared at the blinking cursor. Steady, patient, like a heartbeat refusing to panic. Through the glass walls of the executive conference room, she could still see the COO smiling confidently beneath presentation lights. But now investors leaned closer together instead of relaxing back. Phones appeared, messages moved quietly between assistants. Legal counsel spoke to someone on an encrypted line, and for the first time all morning, the COO stopped smiling for half a second. Only half, but enough. Somewhere deep in the building, thunder cracked hard enough to rattle the windows. Nobody in the office spoke after that, not because they understood the truth yet, because instinctively they sensed the floor beneath the company had just shifted. And by nightfall, someone very powerful was going to realize that invisible people are often the most dangerous ones to erase. The next chapter changes everything. By 6:13 p.m., the office had transformed from a cathedral of ambition into something colder and far more honest. The neon sign in reception still glowed with artificial optimism. Productive future starts here. Yet beneath its soft blue light, employees moved carefully, voices lowered, shoulders tight, as though the building itself had developed ears. Slack notifications erupted every few seconds like distant electrical sparks. Even the espresso machine sounded nervous. Maya sat at her desk beneath the dim halo of a monitor, reviewing deployment records for the third time. Not because she needed to, because calm required rhythm. Outside, rain battered the windows harder now, smearing downtown lights into streaks of gold and silver. Traffic below crawled through puddles like exhausted insects. Somewhere in the engineering wing, someone laughed too loudly and immediately stopped. The entire floor felt suspended between two versions of reality. The one executives were still pretending existed, and the one quietly approaching. Her inbox chimed. From legal counsel subject, confirmation request short, clinical, dangerous. She opened the message. Please confirm whether the attached commit signatures correspond exclusively to your credentials and workstation. Below sat screenshots from the repository history, hundreds of commits, her encryption signature attached to every critical optimization layer, timestamp after timestamp after timestamp. Weeks of invisible labor now arranged with mathematical indifference. Maya stared at the screen for several seconds. The strange part wasn't fear, it was relief. For months, she had felt herself disappearing in slow motion, like ink diluted in water. Meetings where people repeated her ideas louder and received praise for them. Strategy calls she was accidentally excluded from. Internal memos where entire systems she built became executive-driven innovation. Now the evidence sat in black and white, silent, unemotional, impossible to charm. She typed a single sentence. Confirmed. All signatures originate from my credentials under mandatory compliance protocol. Then she hit send. Across the office, a glass conference room door slammed shut. Heads turned instantly. The COO had returned from a private investor call. Even at a distance, his composure looked slightly altered, as if someone had adjusted a painting a few millimeters off-center. Most people would never notice. Maya did. His tie hung looser now. His smile arrived half a second late. He walked quickly through the engineering floor with two executives trailing behind him, speaking in clipped whispers. Timing issue. Contain legal exposure? Verify who accessed? The moment he noticed Maya watching, the conversation stopped. A thin smile spread across his face. Polite, controlled, predatory. He changed direction immediately and approached her desk. Nearby keyboards slowed. Nobody looked directly at them, which in offices usually means everyone is listening. Maya, he said warmly enough for others to hear. Long day. She closed her laptop gently. Seems like it. He rested one hand against the edge of her desk. Casual posture, corporate magazine posture, but tension flickered behind his eyes like static behind glass. You should have come to me directly if you had concerns. Interesting phrasing? Not if there was a misunderstanding. If you had concerns. Maya folded her hands together calmly. Legal contacted me first. For a fraction of a second, something dark crossed his expression. Gone immediately. He chuckled softly. You know how investors are? They panic over documentation details? Documentation details, as if authorship were a typo, as if truth were formatting. Behind him, several engineers pretended to work while silently refreshing Slack channels at machine gun speed. Rumors traveled through startups faster than oxygen through vents. Maya tilted her head slightly. The signatures are valid. Yes, he replied too quickly. Of course they are. Silence settled between them. Not empty silence, measured silence, the kind used in negotiations seconds before someone loses millions. The COO lowered his voice. Look, attribution discussions happen all the time at this level. It's strategic. Nobody's attacking you. There it was again, the careful reshaping of reality. Maya suddenly understood why people like him survived so long in powerful rooms. They didn't break truth outright. They bent it slowly until everyone doubted their own memory. But systems remembered, servers remembered, Git logs remembered everything. I never said anyone attacked me, she answered quietly. That landed harder than anger would have. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and the color drained from his face. Only slightly, but enough. The investor's name glowed across the screen. He stepped away immediately to answer. Miles, he said with forced ease, already walking toward the hallway. Absolutely, we can clarify. The call disconnected before he finished speaking. Maya saw it happen. So did 3 nearby engineers. Nobody breathed for a moment. The COO stared at the phone screen as though it had betrayed him personally. Then another notification appeared, and another, legal, board member, compliance. He walked rapidly toward the executive corridor without another word. The office stayed silent until the elevator doors closed behind him. Then Slack detonated. Investor meeting canceled? Why is finance locked out of forecasting? Did funding freeze? No way. No chance. Wait, a senior back-end engineer slowly stood from his chair 2 rows away. Guys, he whispered, pale as printer paper, the board just suspended the release authorization. Someone dropped a coffee mug in the kitchen. The crack echoed across the floor. Nobody moved. Rain hammered the windows harder, turning the city outside into liquid darkness. Screens reflected across exhausted faces. The office no longer resembled a tech company preparing for launch. It resembled passengers hearing turbulence from the cockpit after the captain stopped speaking. Maya remained seated, still calm, almost unnervingly calm. Not because she planned this, because she had already survived the worst part. Being erased while still alive, everything after that felt strangely manageable. A message appeared from legal counsel again. Please remain available tonight. That single sentence carried enormous weight. Not accusation, not panic, respect. Nearby, 2 junior developers whispered nervously. I thought he built the optimization layer. I mean, he said he did. Then why would investors halt 22 million over 1 engineer? The second question lingered in the air, because deep down, everyone in technology knows the truth. Ideas are cheap, PowerPoints are cheap. Charisma is cheap, but the person who actually makes impossible systems work, that person becomes priceless the moment trust disappears. At 8:04 p.m., security quietly escorted external consultants into the executive wing. At 8:17, repository access permissions changed company-wide. At 8:31, the release countdown vanished from every internal dashboard. No announcement followed, no explanation, only silence spreading floor by floor like water through cracked concrete. Maya finally stood and walked toward the windows. Below, the city shimmered beneath the storm, headlights bending across wet streets like fractured constellations. She remembered her first day at the company 2 years earlier, cheap borrowed blazer, nervous excitement, the belief that talent alone protected people. The memory almost made her smile. Behind her, office whispers kept growing. They're auditing everything. Board emergency session. Funding's frozen until verification clears. Do you think the investors already know? Maya looked at her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, loose strands of dark hair. A woman half the office barely noticed yesterday. Funny how quickly invisibility turns into gravity. Her phone vibrated one final time before she left for the night. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. A measured voice spoke immediately. This is Miles Arden, the lead investor, the man who had nearly written a $22 million check that morning. Rain hissed against the glass, while the entire office unknowingly held its breath around her. We verified the code author, he said calmly. I believe we need to discuss what happens next. And suddenly, for the first time all day, Maya realized the story was no longer staying inside that building. Somebody else was about to hear it too. You'll want to see what he asks her next? After everything Maya uncovered, one quiet decision changed the balance of power overnight. Which moment hit you hardest? The demo at 11:42, the signed commits, or the investor's phone call? If you've ever watched someone get underestimated in silence, share your thoughts below. And if you want the next chapter the moment it drops, stay close. Maya took the investor call in an empty conference room overlooking the rain-soaked city. The room was small compared to the executive suites upstairs, but somehow more intimidating. No decorative awards, no branded neon slogans, just a matte black table, a muted speakerphone, and glass walls reflecting the storm outside like fractured mirrors. At 8:52 p.m., the building had gone strangely quiet. Not peaceful quiet, survival quiet. The kind offices fall into when people realize careers may already be rearranging themselves behind closed doors. Maya sat slowly, phone pressed to her ear. "This is Maya." A pause crackled through the line before the investor answered. "I appreciate you staying available." Miles Arden's voice carried the controlled calm of someone used to moving enormous amounts of money without changing his heartbeat. No unnecessary warmth, no intimidation either, just precision sharpened by experience. Through the glass wall, Maya saw employees pretending not to look toward the conference room, pretending badly. "I understand there's concern regarding attribution," she said carefully. "That's one way to describe it," Miles replied. In the background, she heard faint conversation, pages turning, keyboard clicks. Other people were listening, board members probably, lawyers too. "Interesting," Miles continued. "We halted the funding because discrepancies appeared between executive statements and technical verification records. Discrepancies, such a polished word for betrayal." Maya rested her elbow lightly against the table. "The repository history should clarify ownership." "It does." Short answer, heavy answer. Lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the room in white for a brief second. The storm outside had deepened into something theatrical, almost cinematic. Water streamed down the windows in shimmering rivers, while distant thunder rolled between skyscrapers like furniture dragged across heaven. Then Miles asked the question she had quietly expected all evening. "Did anyone instruct you to conceal authorship?" Maya looked down at the reflection of ceiling lights across the table. Here it was. The line people cross carefully when companies begin dividing themselves into survivors and liabilities. She chose each word slowly. "No one instructed me directly. Attribution was repeatedly minimized in internal communication." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you have documentation supporting that?" Maya's eyes drifted toward her laptop resting beside the chair. Folders, emails, meeting logs, archived Slack threads. Months of small omissions stitched together into a pattern impossible to dismiss once fully visible. "Yes," she answered. The silence afterward felt different, not skeptical anymore, calculating. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed hard enough to echo through the ventilation system. A few heads outside the conference room turned instantly, then came hurried footsteps. Two executives crossed the hallway carrying binders and laptops with the expression of passengers running across a sinking ship while pretending the deck was still level. Miles spoke again, softer now. "You understand this changes governance concerns significantly." Governance concerns. Another polished phrase, translation. Someone in leadership may have just destroyed investor trust. Maya leaned back carefully. For months, she had imagined this moment differently. Dramatic confrontation, anger, vindication sharp enough to feel satisfying. Instead, she mostly felt tired. Not weak tired, winter tired. The kind that settles into people after carrying invisible weight too long. "I didn't contact investors," she said quietly. "I know," Miles replied immediately. That answer surprised her. Then he added, "Which is partly why this situation concerns me." Outside the room, Slack notifications burst again across nearby desks. Tiny digital explosions lighting exhausted faces blue and white. One engineer stood frozen beside the printer reading something on his phone. Another muttered, "No way." The tension in the office had evolved beyond panic now. Panic burns hot. This felt colder, like structural damage slowly becoming visible. Miles cleared his throat lightly. "We're conducting a full review tonight. Effective immediately, release authorization remains suspended." Maya closed her eyes briefly. There it was again. Funding halt. The phrase now moved through the company like a ghost in expensive shoes. $22 million hanging over everyone's head because one executive believed nobody would check the GIT log closely enough. The irony was almost elegant. "What happens next?" she asked. The investor's response came carefully measured. "That depends on whether this was ego," he said, "or fraud." The word landed softly, still devastating. Outside the conference room, the COO suddenly appeared at the far end of the hallway. Even from a distance, he looked different now, not defeated, dangerous. His movements had become too controlled, too deliberate, like someone manually holding together a structure already splitting beneath pressure. Two board members walked beside him, speaking rapidly. Legal counsel followed several steps behind, carrying a tablet and physical folders. The COO noticed Maya immediately through the glass wall. Their eyes met. For a brief second, the hallway noise seemed to disappear. No anger crossed his face, which somehow made it worse. He gave her a small nod, not respectful, not apologetic, assessment, as though he were still trying to calculate whether the situation could somehow be contained. Then legal counsel said something quietly to him. The COO stopped walking. Actually stopped. Maya saw the exact moment he realized the problem had become larger than internal politics, because counsel handed him printed pages, repository history, signed commits, verification reports, proof, real proof. The COO glanced toward Maya one last time before continuing down the hallway without another word. But his confidence had changed shape now. Earlier it filled rooms. Now it merely survived inside them. Miles spoke again through the phone speaker. "There's another matter." Maya turned back toward the table. "I'm listening. We'd like independent verification regarding the optimization framework before tomorrow morning." The request carried obvious meaning beneath the formal language. They no longer trusted executive leadership to explain the system accurately. They trusted the engineer. A strange ache rose in Maya's chest. Not triumph, recognition, the simple human pain of finally being seen after months of strategic invisibility. "I can provide documentation," she said. "We would appreciate that." Thunder shook the windows hard enough to vibrate the glass. Somewhere nearby, the building lights flickered once. The entire office froze instinctively. Then power stabilized again. Nervous laughter scattered weakly through the engineering floor. Nobody believed in stability anymore. When the call finally ended, Maya remained seated for several seconds, staring at the dark screen of her phone. Her reflection hovered faintly against the glass wall behind it. Outside the room, employees instantly pretended to work the moment she stood. One developer nearly dropped his headset trying to look casual. Another whispered, "Was that the investor?" Maya gave no answer. She simply collected her laptop and stepped into the hallway. The atmosphere shifted immediately. People moved aside unconsciously, not out of fear, out of awareness. Hours earlier, she had been background noise in human form. Now every person on the floor understood something irreversible had happened. And somewhere above them, inside closed executive rooms glowing late into the stormy night, people with million-dollar salaries were discovering the terrifying difference between controlling a narrative and surviving evidence. At 11:18 p.m., the executive floor smelled like cold coffee, printer toner, and fear wrapped in expensive cologne. The storm outside had weakened into steady rain, but inside the company the pressure kept rising, invisible and crushing. Lights still burned behind conference room glass. Assistants hurried through corridors carrying laptops and legal folders with the stiff posture of people trying not to become part of the story themselves. Maya stood alone near the kitchenette, waiting for the ancient espresso machine to finish groaning through another cycle. The machine sputtered violently, then died halfway. Typical. Even the appliances seemed exhausted. She leaned against the counter while the city glimmered below in wet silver reflections. Her phone screen glowed softly beside her cup. 3 unread emails, 7 Slack mentions, 2 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and 1 message from her mother. "Are you still at work?" Maya stared at that sentence longer than expected. Funny how a simple question could suddenly feel heavier than investor audits and board investigations. Before she could answer, footsteps approached behind her. Not hurried, measured. She turned. Legal counsel stood in the doorway holding a slim tablet under one arm. Ethan Vale, mid-40s, impossibly calm. The kind of person whose voice never needed volume because consequences already traveled ahead of him. Earlier that day, he had barely acknowledged her existence. Now he looked directly at her. "Still here," he observed quietly. "So are you." A faint trace of amusement crossed his face. "Occupational hazard." Rain tapped softly against the windows, while the office beyond them hummed with low panic. Somewhere down the corridor, someone argued in hushed but furious tones. A copier continued spitting out documents like a machine trying to outrun disaster. Ethan stepped closer. "The board is beginning preliminary interviews tonight." Maya wrapped her hands around the warm paper cup. "That sounds serious." "It became serious around 11:42 this morning." The exact timestamp. He remembered it too. That detail sent a strange chill through her. Ethan rested the tablet lightly against the counter. "Your documentation was thorough." Another carefully chosen word. Maya almost smiled. "I work in systems." "Yes," he said calmly. "I'm beginning to understand that." Silence settled between them for a moment. Not awkward, observational, like 2 people standing near the edge of something unstable while pretending not to hear the cracking underneath. Down the hallway, the elevator doors opened sharply. The COO emerged with 2 outside attorneys. Conversation across the floor dimmed instantly. Even from a distance, his appearance had changed dramatically since morning. His tie was gone now. The top button of his shirt hung open. Shadows pooled beneath his eyes beneath the sterile office lighting. But somehow he still carried himself like a man refusing to accept gravity. One attorney whispered rapidly beside him while scrolling through documents on a tablet. The COO looked irritated, not frightened. That distinction mattered. He noticed Ethan beside Maya almost immediately. Then his gaze shifted toward her coffee cup. Such a small detail. Yet his expression hardened slightly, as if the sight of her standing calmly in the middle of corporate collapse offended him more than the investigation itself. "Interesting." Ethan lowered his voice. "He requested emergency review of all engineering attribution procedures." Maya blinked once. "Tonight?" "Yes." "Why?" Ethan's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Because people tend to reorganize definitions when evidence arrives." The sentence carried such dry precision that Maya nearly laughed despite herself. Across the office, another Slack wave erupted. One message preview flashed across a nearby monitor before disappearing. "Board session extended until..." The rest vanished too quickly to read, but she didn't need the full sentence. The atmosphere already explained everything. Something larger than damage control was happening upstairs. The COO suddenly changed direction and walked toward them. Not aggressively, smoothly. That made it worse. Employees immediately looked away from their screens with exaggerated concentration. Nobody wanted witnesses attached to their names later. When he reached the kitchenette, his attention fixed entirely on Maya. "Long night," he said. His tone sounded lighter than his eyes. Maya set down the untouched coffee. "Seems expensive, too." For the first time all day, a genuine reaction cracked through his composure. "Tiny. Dangerous." Ethan remained silent beside them, watching with the stillness of someone mentally recording every syllable. The COO folded his arms slowly. "You've created unnecessary chaos." Maya met his gaze evenly. "The repository history already existed. That's not the point." There, the truth finally slipping through. Not denial, not misunderstanding, control. Outside the windows, lightning flickered far across the skyline, illuminating the office in pale flashes. Reflections moved across glass walls like ghosts pacing corporate aquariums. The COO leaned slightly closer. "You think investors care about engineering ethics?" he asked quietly. "They care about confidence," Maya answered just as softly. "Confidence in what?" That landed harder than confrontation. For a second, neither spoke. Then Ethan interrupted with perfect timing. "The board would prefer all discussions remain factual tonight." The COO stepped back immediately, irritation flashing across his face before disappearing beneath professionalism once more. A performance rebuilt in real time. Impressive, honestly. Also exhausting. He adjusted his sleeves carefully. Of course. Then his attention returned to Maya one final time. "You could have handled this internally." The sentence lingered in the air after he walked away. Maya watched him disappear into another conference room, surrounded by lawyers, and reflected briefly on how people in power often describe silence as professionalism. The office buzz deepened again the moment he vanished. Whispers spread. Was that legal counsel with her? "I heard compliance locked executive access?" "No, finance did." "Wait, seriously?" Someone else muttered. "This company's never recovering from this." Maya finally checked her mother's text. "Still at work?" She typed back slowly. "Yeah, just complicated tonight." Three dots appeared almost instantly. Then another message arrived. "You always survive complicated things." Maya stared at the screen while warmth rose unexpectedly behind her ribs. Not dramatic warmth, steady warmth, the kind that keeps people standing long after adrenaline burns away. Ethan glanced toward her phone but politely said nothing. Then his own device buzzed sharply. He checked the notification, and for the first time since she met him, his expression shifted. Only slightly, but enough. "What happened?" Maya asked. He looked toward the executive hallway before answering. "The lead investor requested direct technical review tomorrow morning." Maya frowned faintly. "With me?" "Yes." The hallway beyond them suddenly felt much quieter because everyone nearby had heard. A senior engineer froze beside the printer. An assistant nearly missed a step carrying documents. Someone whispered, "Oh no." Not because they feared Maya, because they understood what the request meant. Investors no longer trusted leadership explanations. They wanted the engineer in the room. Ethan slipped the tablet beneath his arm again. "You should go home soon," he said calmly. "Tomorrow will be longer?" Then he paused before leaving. "One more thing." Maya looked up. "The board reviewed your signed commits personally." A beat of silence. "And?" Ethan's expression remained unreadable. "They were impressed by how carefully you documented everything." Then he walked away. Maya stood motionless beside the dead espresso machine while rain shimmered against the glass behind her. Hours earlier, she had been excluded from release credits like an inconvenient footnote. Now board members were studying her work line by line in midnight conference rooms, while investors postponed $22 million waiting for answers. And somewhere deep inside the building, behind polished doors and expensive legal language, powerful people were beginning to understand a terrifying reality. The quiet employee they ignored knew exactly where every system was buried. By 7:06 a.m., the storm had passed, but the city still looked bruised. Water clung to sidewalks in trembling silver sheets. Early commuters drifted beneath umbrellas with the exhausted expressions of people returning to battles no one would remember by Friday. The sunrise behind downtown towers was pale and fragile, filtered through clouds the color of old receipts. Maya arrived carrying the same backpack she'd used for 2 years. No dramatic entrance, no victorious energy, just fatigue wrapped neatly inside discipline. The lobby screens still displayed the company logo, though someone had disabled the animated launch countdown overnight. Now, the empty space beneath the logo looked strangely ominous, like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. At reception, security checked her badge twice, not because she was under suspicion, because protocol had changed after midnight. That alone told her how bad things had become. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt unusually slow. Four engineers stood beside her in tense silence, pretending to read emails while secretly studying her reflection in the mirrored walls. One finally spoke just before the doors opened. "Hey, Maya?" She glanced over. The engineer hesitated. "I read the optimization architecture review last night." A pause. "That was yours?" Not accusatory. Odd. Maya gave a small nod. The elevator doors opened before he could answer, but the expression on his face followed her down the hallway. The executive conference room looked completely different in daylight. Yesterday, it had resembled a stage. Today, it resembled a courtroom pretending to be modern. Coffee cups littered the table, sleeves rolled up, laptops open, legal binders stacked beside untouched catered pastries nobody had appetite for anymore. Through the glass walls, assistants moved with emergency-level efficiency. And seated near the far end of the table sat Miles Arden. The lead investor looked exactly like the kind of man who could freeze $22 million before finishing breakfast. Perfect posture, silver watch, eyes too calm. Beside him sat two board members, Ethan from legal counsel, and three external auditors reviewing repository records across dual monitors. The COO was already there too, still polished, still composed, but now his confidence looked expensive to maintain. The room quieted when Maya entered. No applause, no acknowledgement, yet the atmosphere shifted immediately anyway. Miles gestured toward an empty seat near the center of the table. "Thank you for coming?" "Interesting. Yesterday she wouldn't even have been invited into this room." Maya sat carefully, placing her laptop beside a stack of audit documents. Through the windows, weak morning light spilled across glass towers outside, turning the skyline pale gold. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Miles folded his hands together. "We spent most of the night reviewing authorship records." Straight to the point. The COO leaned back slightly. "I think it's important we remember software development is collaborative by nature." Maya almost admired the persistence. Even now, even here. The external auditor nearest the projector cleared his throat gently. The signed commits indicate primary authorship concentration exceeding 87% on the disputed framework. Silence, cold silence, the kind that forces reality into rooms where charisma used to dominate. The COO's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "One engineer implementing architecture doesn't redefine executive oversight," he replied. Ethan answered before anyone else could. "No one is discussing oversight." Another pause. "We are discussing representation." That word landed with surgical precision. Representation. Not coding. Not teamwork. Truth. Miles finally turned toward Maya directly. "Could you walk us through the optimization sequence?" Every face in the room shifted toward her. Yesterday, those same people listened while others explained her work for her. Now the room waited quietly for the actual architect. Maya opened her laptop. The screen glow reflected softly across tired faces as she pulled up diagrams, deployment chains, and repository history records linked to the Git log. No theatrics, no revenge speech, just systems. She explained the synchronization redesign first, then the predictive allocation layer, then the recovery protocol responsible for reducing latency during overload conditions. Technical language flowed calmly through the room while auditors followed along in real time. Halfway through the explanation, one board member interrupted. The COO presented this framework as executive-directed innovation. Nobody moved, not even slightly. Maya kept her voice even. "The implementation history is time-stamped." Simple answer, Devastating answer. Across the table, the COO shifted posture for the first time all morning. Tiny movement, loud meaning. The external auditor enlarged another screen containing verification signatures, hundreds of signed commits, Maya's credentials attached to each one like fingerprints beneath glass. Miles studied the monitor silently for several moments before speaking. And these signatures cannot be retroactively fabricated? The auditor shook his head immediately, not without triggering authentication inconsistencies across the repository chain. The room became very still. Outside the glass walls, employees slowed while passing by the conference room. Word had clearly spread overnight. People weren't just curious anymore, they were witnessing gravity change direction. The COO finally leaned forward. "I think we're losing perspective here," he said carefully. "This company exists because leadership secured strategy, capital, partnerships, and trust," Miles interrupted calmly. That stopped everything. Even the air felt paused. Miles rested one hand against the table. Capital follows trust, always. No raised voice, no anger, which somehow made it catastrophic. The COO looked toward legal counsel. "Are we seriously jeopardizing release over internal attribution politics?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "No." A beat passed. "We're jeopardizing release because investors were potentially misled during active funding review." There it was. The sentence nobody wanted spoken aloud. Not ego anymore, exposure. The COO looked suddenly older beneath the conference room lighting. Not defeated, just worn thin around the edges, like someone discovering confidence alone cannot negotiate with evidence. Maya watched quietly while the room recalibrated around truth in real time, and strangely she felt no satisfaction, only clarity. Months ago, she would have imagined this moment as explosive and triumphant, but real accountability arrived quietly, through timestamps, through audit trails, through systems that remembered what people hoped to erase. Outside, sunlight finally pierced through the remaining storm clouds and spilled across the windows in bright bands of gold. The city looked cleaner afterward, sharper. Miles closed the final audit folder. "Effective immediately," he said. "Funding discussions remain suspended pending governance restructuring." Nobody reacted outwardly, but the impact rolled invisibly through the room anyway. Governance restructuring, corporate language for earthquakes. The COO stared down at the table without speaking. For the first time since Maya met him, he had nothing prepared. No performance, no framing, no room left between reality and consequence. Miles turned toward Maya again. "We would also like to discuss your future with the company." The sentence hung gently in the air, not as charity, as recognition. Beyond the conference room walls, employees continued moving through hallways carrying coffee cups and laptops, unaware they were walking through the exact moment a company permanently changed shape. Maya looked out across the skyline one last time. Rainwater still glimmered on rooftops below. Traffic flowed steadily through bright morning streets. The world outside kept moving with indifferent elegance, untouched by executive collapse or investor panic. Funny, she thought, all this chaos because one quiet engineer kept her signed commits, and somewhere deep in the building's humming servers, the truth had been waiting patiently the entire time.